Botanical Brunette, and welcome to my channel. If you are not a stranger to my channel, you already know my love for air plants. I did a air plant styling video a couple of months ago, and I've been meaning to do just a good basic air plant care video. Basically showing you guys what I do to take care of my air plants and give you guys some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. And also at the end of this video, we're gonna water all of my air plants so I can show you guys how to water your air plants. Now, air plants are notorious for being beginner plants. They are really easy to care for, but I have heard a lot of people lately tell me, I love air plants, but I can never keep them alive. I'm here to tell you, if you can keep like all of these like really hard to care for plants alive, you can keep an air plant alive. Air plants are the easiest plants to take care of, and they're also super versatile. You can place them wherever you want within reason, but they're just so fun, and I really can't vouch for them enough. So hopefully this video will convince you, if you are not an air plant lover, to maybe dip your toes in the air plant world and get some air plants for your plant collection. So I always mention in my care videos that you want to mimic the natural environment of the plant to your home. Let's go back to kind of the basics and learn where air plants originate from. So air plants are native to Mexico, South and Central America, and also if you live in Florida, you're also no stranger to air plants. Air plants grow natural in Florida. I see them all the time. Air plants are native to really hot, subtropical, tropical climates, so you know that they're gonna need some good humidity. So in the wild, air plants actually attach themselves to tree trunks or really any natural material like rocks or even plants. So the way that air plants survive in the wild is they attach their little roots. Yes, air plants have roots. They attach their little roots into that organic material and feed off of rainfall and animal droppings. They get their moisture from the rain, and also they get fertilized from the animal droppings that are left in trees. Yummy. So now that we know how air plants live in the wild, now we can take that knowledge and adapt it into our homes in a way to help your air plants survive in your home. So when I started getting into air plants, I was like, these things are so like otherworldly. Air plants are so cool. Like there are so many different shapes, sizes, and varieties. Like this like air plant, it's kind of alien-like. It's got like kind of like purpley like edges on it, and then we have like a standard air plant. These are kind of like what you kind of see most of all, and then we have like fuzzy ones like this guy, and kind of weird ones like this, and they also grow flowers, and we'll get into flowers in a minute. But like air plants just come in so many shapes and sizes, and like you can get an air plant that will fit into your lifestyle and fit into your home. I have found with air plants that some of them are a little bit more difficult to care for than others. Like for instance, this air plant, this type of air plant, for some reason has been pretty difficult for me to care for. I've actually killed 2 of these already. The reason why I find that these are harder to care for than others is because they are so tightly knit in there versus like one like this, which is kind of open. You can see a lot of the like in between the leaves, where this is really tightly bound. These I have root rotted so many times in the past. Watering is probably where people fall short, and that is probably the biggest mistake that people make, is not watering your air plants correctly. Which brings me into watering. Watering your air plants is vital. So your air plants are actually all made of these tiny little hairs. Now it's easier to see on this plant. So this air plant has tiny little hairs, and those are called trichomes. Those are actually what absorb the water. You would think that it would absorb through the base, kind of their root area, but it actually absorbs into the leaves. Now remember, you think that an air plant is going to attach themselves to the tree. When the water brushes down, yes, it's going to get to the back, but a lot of times that's actually snug into like tree bark where this is going to get all the water. So it actually absorbs water through the leaves and it kind of gets trapped on those little baby hairs. All air plants have a certain level of trichomes. If you see like an air plant, they're always super soft and velvety because of those trichomes. For me, I water my air plants in the spring and summer about once a week, and in the fall and winter, I do about once or twice a month. I've seen a lot of contradicting things on the internet about how long you water your air plants for. But for me, I water my air plants for about 30 minutes. Fill up a tub and I let them kind of soak for 30 minutes. Soaking is not good for all of them, like this guy. This guy, I actually do not soak at all. I actually flip it upside down and I let the water kind of trickle around. Because of the trichomes, you'll notice that you'll see the like fuzziness on this air plant. So basically, when you get those wet, it gets dark. So it's like if you get really anything wet, it gets darker. Once this gets like darker and you can kind of see that it looks wet, I let it dry out. I do not let this soak. I think that was my biggest issue before, is just letting these type of plants soak. But a plant like this is really easy because basically when you're watering it, you're gonna shake out all that water and it's not going to pool inside. Now, if you notice about it, there's nothing wrong with kind of just wetting down your air plants and not soaking them. Soaking them does give them a kind of a deeper watering. If you're not going to soak your air plants, I would suggest to water them a little bit more often. I let my air plants soak for about 30 minutes and then I kind of drain the water out, shake them out, and let them dry. I set them out to dry. For me, I like to do it kind of in the late afternoon, early evening. So I let it kind of overnight dry out, and then in the morning I'll kind of flip them, like, because you're basically letting them sit. So they'll kind of just lay upside down like this. And again, we'll go over this and I'll show you, but they'll kind of sit like this. And in the morning, I'll kind of like flip them up, because sometimes, like especially with my Xerographica, the leaves are still a little bit wet from the towel that it's sitting on. So that will just give it a little bit extra, but you just want to make sure that that water is not pooling inside of the leaves, because that causes root rot. Yeah, these get rot. These will rot. And that is the biggest thing that I have learned, is to not root rot these. Now for your watering, I would suggest to do rainwater. Rainwater is the best. That's what they get in the wild. So I would suggest that, but you can just use tap water. I'm going to be using tap water today, and I use tap water pretty much every time I water my air plants. So it's completely fine. Depending on how hard your water is, if your home is known to have a little bit harder water, then I would maybe suggest using like at least a filtered water. Like you can get like a Brita filter, fill it up and kind of pour it over, or you can buy water. It's up to you. But I mean, you just might get some buildup if you have like harder water in your home. Honestly, if you can collect it, rainwater is the best thing you can do for your air plants. So for humidity and temperature, because air plants are native to subtropical, tropical areas, you know that it's needing to be warm and you know that it's going to be humid. So you want to keep your humidity around 50 to 60% or higher. I have found in my home it's about that 60-50% range, and I don't need to water my air plants really that often. After you get to know your air plants, you'll actually be able to tell, like just from feeling it, if it needs to be watered. You'll also notice like browning on the tips. So if it needs to be watered or it's not getting enough humidity, you'll get that browning on the tips as well. You can actually just snip those right off. I'll kind of show you, like this one has a little bit of browning on the tip, so right here. So you can just take that and you can snip the whole piece, or you can just snip the tips off like you do with your foliage plants. And because we know that air plants absorb water through their leaves, any high humidity will kind of help you not needing to water them as often. Now again, you can mist your air plants If your humidity isn't super high, like if it's below 50, you can mist your air plants. Just make sure that it's not getting into the base of the air plant and gonna cause that root rot. And because air plants like a warm house, you'll want to keep your air plants in a range of 50 to 90 degrees. So for fertilizing, fertilizer is a pretty easy task when it comes to your air plants. They are going to be that general rule of thumb. Fertilize in the spring and summer and slow it down in the fall and winter. Now I have this plant food from the air plant shop and this has worked pretty well. I found that my air plants are growing pretty well since using this. Like, I've actually used it only a few times and I have noticed a little bit of a difference in them. I have noticed that they're kind of growing a little bit better and they seem softer, if that's a thing. I don't know, but they just seem a little bit happier since I've started using that. That's actually a spray fertilizer that you can put on your plants. You can also soak your air plants in whatever fertilizer you use for your plants. So you actually can use the same fertilizer you use for your normal plants. Just make sure that you dilute it a quarter of the amount. So if you use, let's just make math easy, and you use a gallon of water versus a cup of fertilizer, you'll want to do a gallon of water to a quarter cup of fertilizer. You want to just really dilute that down. It doesn't need that punch, like that 1-2 punch that your plants need. These are going to be completely fine with a nice diluted fertilizer. And you can soak your air plants in the fertilizer water just like you would. So you could replace one of those waterings with a fertilizer soak and it will do just the same thing. So lighting. Lighting is also another issue that people kind of get confused when it comes to air plants. I've seen a lot of things out there where people will say that air plants are great in low light. I have not found that to be the case. I put my air plants in low light and they rot immediately. I actually lost, I had 2 xerographicas and I lost one of my xerographicas because it was in a lower light area. It did get some light from my plant room and a north window, but it barely did. It's like in the middle of both of them, like at least I would say like 10 to 15 feet from each window. So it really barely got any light and it wound up rotting. So you want to make sure that you put your air plants in a bright location. That's where they're going to thrive. Just make sure you keep an eye on it. If you put it in a sunnier area, just make sure that the leaves are not burning and it's not getting too brown and crispy. You just want to kind of keep an eye on it, but I haven't had any issues with that. Ideally, you just want to put it in a bright area. You don't want to really put it in a low light area. I wouldn't suggest that. And if you do, maybe not water it as often. So the lifespan of a air plant is actually kind of interesting. I found with doing my research a couple of years ago that air plants actually only live 2 to 5 years. After that, they wind up dying off. But before they die off, they give you these beautiful, spectacular blooms. Just like I showed you in my last video, the air plant that I got was actually blooming and I didn't think about it. I already knew that when it blooms, that's like their grand finale and they give off offshoots and they wind up, the main mother plant winds up dying. I knew that going in there, but I still wanted that blooming air plant. So I got that air plant and it is starting to kind of wither away, I guess. Usually when that happens, the plant will bloom. In return, it will give you 3 to 5 pups on average. And you can propagate them via separation. You can take those pups and kind of cut them, or you can even just, if you just kind of crack them. So I'm not going to do it with this one, but you can see that this pup is kind of here. I could take it and just snap these and this will callus off and create a completely new air plant. I've actually kept these two together just because they're kind of fun. I kind of like them together. I mean, and it doesn't seem to bother the mother plant, and the baby plant is already giving me these like long tendrils. So I think doing okay. Basically, that's what you want when you have a plant that starts to bloom. They're beautiful and they're great, but that also is an indication that it is going to die off eventually. So it's kind of at the end of its life cycle when it blooms. So for toxicity, these plants are actually okay for pets and children. So if you have a little one around or a curious cat or dog, they are not toxic to pets or children. Go ahead and freely put those wherever you want because it's completely safe. Because air plants don't need to be planted and they can kind of be placed anywhere, placement is super easy for air plants and super fun. So I have a full video, like I had mentioned before, I have a full video on how I style my air plants. It kind of shows you that you can really place your air plants anywhere. In my Etsy shop, I sell air plant sun catchers that hang from the windows that give you these beautiful rainbows, but also hold your air plants. I also will place them in like tea light jars, like tea light candles. Literally, it's endless. You can do whatever you want. Now, typically air plants do prefer you put them on a natural base. So basically putting them on like driftwood or rough wood or even a rock, any really natural surface, they would appreciate that, but you don't have to. I have my big Xerographica that sits on a couple plant coffee table books, like under my coffee table, and it does completely fine under there. Doesn't need anything like that. Now again, it probably would prefer if I gave it a little stick or something to attached to, but it's not necessary. So those are just a couple tips that I have to care for your air plants and basically to kind of shed a light on how easy it is. I have a few air plants that I have gathered, but I need to gather the rest of my air plants because I have a lot of air plants to water today. Let's go gather up my air plants and I'll show you exactly how I water and care for them. So here is my basket full of air plants that I have gathered. One just fell. So these are actually going to get watered. I already filled my sink with room temperature, kind of cool tap water. Didn't really put anything in it. I actually did fertilize these last watering, so I'm not going to fertilize them this time. So really it's easy. You just take them and you just plop them in. You just kind of throw them all in. I'm actually going to show you how I water this giant Xerographica, but you just basically toss them all in. Really nothing crazy about it. Just toss them all in. And then you want to make sure that they are completely submerged. Again, they absorb through the leaves. You can see like where it's gotten wet and where it's stayed dry. So you want to just like make sure that they're completely submerged in the water. Now for my Xerographica, I actually filled my second sink, but I think this should be fine for all of them. So let me grab. So the Xerographica, same thing, you just dunk her in the water. Now because she's so big, you don't need to have this in the water. You can just have it upside down and just kind of soaking in there. Now, we're gonna let these soak for like 30 minutes. These do need a good soak. Last time I watered them, I kind of really just rinsed them off. I didn't really like water them just because I fertilized them. So I'm going to just let these guys soak for about 30 minutes, but I wanted to show you also how to water this air plant. So this air plant, again, like I said, is a very trickier air plant to water, but it's actually probably the easiest air plant to water. This is how I water it. Very easy. Keep it upside down, and I just let the water kind of trickle over it. Let the leaves get nice and saturated. Let the trichomes really get moisturized, and then I just let it kind of sit. So I just let it sit like upside down, like on my sink, and just let it do that for about 30 minutes. So all these air plants are just gonna sit here for a bit. Now for my second batch of air plants, I'm actually going to show you how I water all of these. So these are actually my wholesale air plants. These are the air plants that sell in my Etsy shop as like an add-on for your plant hanger. So basically what I do is I just fill this bowl with water. I'm not gonna let these little air plants soak as long as the other ones just because I just got these. I always recommend when you get an air plant from me or from anywhere to make sure that you at least give them like a 15-minute soak after you get them, and no fertilizer when you get them. And then these are also ones that I sell as well, and these are very thirsty, so I really need to make sure that they get a good amount of water. You'll start to notice if they're really thirsty that they'll start to like shrivel up like the leaves, but once they get a good amount of water, they'll bounce right back. Like you can see, like this guy is very thirsty. So these are definitely going to be soaking for at least 30 minutes. Now, if you have a thirstier air plant, you can soak them for longer. Just check on them, just make sure that they're doing okay, but that's basically it. So that's basically it. So in the morning, I'm going to check on those air plants and just make sure that they are nice and dry before I put them away. Just always making sure that the plants are completely dry before you put them away, especially if you're putting them in an enclosed container or really anything like that that's not super open air. I have found that sometimes if they're not completely dry, that it can cause some root rot. But that's it. That is kind of how you care for air plants. It's super simple, super easy. It's kind of a set it and forget it kind of plant. Even if you're in a pinch with the watering, you can even just kind of mist them or kind of just run them underwater and let them sit and dry. Just really making sure that you shake out all that water and just make sure that you really get them dried out. If you're not an air plant lover, that I've convinced you to at least try them out again and give them another shot, because honestly they're super fun and super easy. Let me know in the comments if you are an air plant lover or what is your favorite air plant. And that's it for today. I hope you guys all have a great day and stay botanical.